I would like to preface this by saying that I am neither a professional media critic nor experienced in the field, so I am unfamiliar with filmmaking terminology, and some of my criticism may subsequently or inherently be more personal distaste than objective or typical standards. But the One Piece live-action adaptation produced by Netflix is a bad adaptation. It's a decent show, but bad adaptation whose most significant accomplishment is demonstrating the efficacy and quality of its source material. And there are a multitude of problems plaguing its writing and presentation. I will start with compliments, however. The costume and set design is excellent, with the exception of Arlong and, to a lesser extent, Garp. It is clear that significant effort went into creating real, physical, tangible representations of the characters and locations. Baratier and Arlong Park in particular come to mind, with Baratier actually being realized better than in the source material. Being able to see a real kitchen, a real restaurant, and a real ship sells the floating restaurant in a way drawings and animation cannot as adequately accomplish. Arlong Park and the town outside of it, Nami's house included, are not just accurate, they are considerably effective in portraying the sheer scope of it all. A problem, if it even is much of one, particularly in early One Piece, is that even massive things can feel small on the constrained drawings of a manga panel. The most obvious way live action helps sell the sizing of objects and places is the ships. The decks of the Going Merry, the Thousand Sunny, and all of the other ships have a tendency to feel smaller than they actually are with the way that character interactions and fights are shown in the drawn mediums. In the live action, the ships are gigantic, as ships actually are. The Navy battleship is like an aircraft carrier or a freightliner. That observation, that sensation, contributes to selling the scope of the series, always having that contrast of the small main characters participating in a world much bigger than they are. It's one of the many thematic cores of the series, as the Straw Hats constantly fight enemies who literally get larger and larger physically, and force the impossibly interconnected world whose existence is supposed to be impenetrable to a band of 10 individuals to bow to their will. Big ships present a big world. Costumes feel like cosplay most of the time. While some may take that as an insult, I think it's a compliment. Cosplayers put significant time and effort into their costumes, and in the case of One Piece, have to retrofit inhuman designs into physically realizable and wearable clothing and makeup. The live action mostly does an excellent job of this. Captain Kuro, as the butler Clawhador, retains everything about his design and mannerisms which make him memorable. Buggy looks like a clown pirate, though perhaps a bit too insane of one. Zeph is exactly on point. The various minor characters have a lot of attention put into their wacky designs, which have kept them instantly recognizable for decades. And let's not forget the main characters, the Straw Hat Pirates, who also look on point. There were some compromises made for the inhuman designs, but those with two exceptions are negligible. The fishmen look pretty good, for example. I do have a bone to pick with Garp and Arlong, however. Garp is far more of a personal preference, where in the source material, his chest is the size of a shed. And it's awesome! Doorways should have to be quadruple the width in order to accommodate the girth of a man who punches battleships for morning exercise. Meanwhile, in the live action, he's just a normal-sized man. It's sad, but understandable, and it's not really bothersome. Arlong, on the other hand, doesn't work in a way I may not adequately explain or that I misunderstand, and it's a shame. In the source material, he is large, overbearing, and chiseled. His chin extends out pointedly, his body structure is thick and obviously outlined, and his stature is overwhelming. Arlong is the first opponent for Luffy who is significantly larger than him, standing at close to twice his size. In the live action, however, he is merely the same size. This itself is unfortunate, but I think what really hurts this realization is that he doesn't fill out the clothes he is wearing. When the clothes are larger than the man, it makes the man look smaller. The actual fishy aspects of the costume are fine though. As I said, the fishmen looked great. I also miss Dwarf Kobe, but I understand why they wouldn't in live action have him be a dwarf, only for, if they are to continue the series, have to make him normally sized later. The CGI is also very solid. The rubber body of Luffy is believable, the detaching body of Buggy is pretty good, and the Sea King looks fantastic. I'm sure there are other instances of visual effects, but it wasn't noticeable. And that's a compliment. Visual effects aren't supposed to be noticeable, because when they are, it tends to be distracting. Fight choreography is also really good. Zoro and Sanji get a ton of love on that front, which makes sense, them being characters who use fighting styles closest to real-world martial arts. It is easy to create fights for them which effectively, and excitingly, show them fending off swarms of enemies, or dueling stronger characters, and they are cool to watch. The thing I most want to emphasize here, though, is impact. Zoro and Sanji have impact when they slash or kick someone. Nami even does too with her staff. Sometimes it just isn't there for Luffy though, even though it should always have that sensation of releasing tension due to his rubber powers. His arms have a tendency to seem like noodles just bouncing off of objects instead of crossbow bolts or, as the name of his basic attack implies, like a gunshot. It's odd, but it may also just be a personal observation. If I were to hazard a guess why, it would be because elements of the manga drawing are dropped from the visual aesthetic of the adaptation. Elements such as speed and impact lines. To see what I mean, watch the movie Speed Racer. It incorporates those visual effects designed to create emphasis to great effect, whereas live-action One Piece completely lacks them, resulting in a lack of emphasis on what should be attacks with superhuman strength behind them. When a character gets sent flying as a result of one of these attacks, it comes across as silly and jarring, because the visual effects aren't implying that the attack has any more strength behind it than a normal human is capable of. I also think that the sound effects are not quite as good as they are in the anime. And those were supposed to be the compliments, by the way. Now it's for the real issues that I have. The camera work and editing is just bad, at least on average. The cinematography is actually pretty well done for sequences like specific attacks by Luffy, following the stretching and contracting of his limbs. But on the whole, I seriously question the filmmaking decisions and experience of the crew working on the series. The close-ups are all over the place, egregious in magnitude, emphasis, and claustrophobia. I could swear not a single dialogue scene goes by where they aren't cutting between the faces of the people talking, and those shots blur out the background to an excessive, indiscernible degree. The characters could practically be anywhere when you can't see the environment they are interacting within. The camera also gets so close to their faces, it's staggering anyone would willingly film a scene like that. Most of the time, you can't see the entirety. The camera also gets so close to their faces, it's staggering anyone would willingly film a scene like that. Most of the time, you can't see the entirety of their head, sometimes not even the entirety of their face. It's as though the camera director, or whoever handles that shit, is severely nearsighted and doesn't wear glasses, and decided that everyone who watched the series has to see the world in the same way they do. And most of the time, it has this weird sort of fisheye effect, which slightly distorts the curvature of the faces, an effect which is usually used to accomplish some unusual tonal effect, but which here does nothing of the sort. I have to wonder, since they also occasionally did some visual effects in which they would split-screen characters against each other for what the filmmakers would consider dramatic effect, if they wanted to incorporate visual manga aesthetics. All they did was demonstrate an inability to understand both manga and filmmaking, and how those mediums accomplish storytelling. The editing also doesn't work, or at least so I would like to think. I'm not learned or experienced enough to know for sure, and too lazy to sit through 8 hours of footage to fully analyze and confirm if this is the case. But I can confirm for one scene in particular, it is atrocious. Arlong is making this grandiose speech about the superiority of fishmen over humans to the enthralled audience of his crew, and the filmmakers decided to use, I swear, literally every take that was made. Practically every single sentence, every single clause within a sentence that Arlong speaks is a different shot, presumably from a different take, and it's incredibly jarring. Words cannot describe how stupid it is to not have one entire take for that speech. With that scene being that bad, I personally feel it's reasonable to expect a level of quality from the rest of the series, even if I didn't notice it while watching. The real issue with the series as a whole, however, is the writing. Not the scene-to-scene writing, though, which is largely fine. It has a tonal difference with the source material, replacing slapstick overt humor with sarcastic lines. It's, in my opinion, unwelcome, but understandable and inoffensive, despite my friend's insistence that they were no better than Marvel Quip one-liners. Sometimes the actors come across somewhat stiff due to the intra-scene writing, with some notable exceptions like Usopp, but I didn't find it to be that big of a deal. But the structural writing is deeply frustrating, and what makes the biggest accomplishment of this adaptation the demonstration of what makes the source material phenomenal. Instead of following the events of the manga in the same way as the manga, it opts to reframe and reformat the arcs and the characters. Occasionally, this is justifiable and understandable, like with Syrup Village having Usopp's underlings taken out and almost entirely taking place within the mansion. Usually, though, it results in diminishing the emotional impact of each arc and worsening the characters. Instead of opting to start with Child Luffy and telling the story sequentially, it intersplices his backstory with the Alvida and Buggy sections of the story. This is supposed to more efficiently and effectively convey Luffy's character, but instead, it does neither. It makes less sense to compare Luffy drowning at the hands of Buggy against his drowning in the ocean than it does each individually, and the particular reason for this is demonstrated perfectly by Zoro's backstory in the manga. It is placed when Zoro is about to be executed, and the point is him reflecting on his goal, the reason why he cannot allow himself to die yet. Luffy's initial introduction has nothing to do with where his goal to become king of the pirates comes from, or why he has it, and wouldn't be what he reflects upon in the face of death. So what point is there in putting the circumstance in which Shanks saved him against Buggy drowning him? They aren't thematically connected. Also, pacing out the backstory to be interspliced across the first 2 episodes gives it less impact and, if anything, wastes time rather than increases efficiency. Usually, when scenes are spliced together to compare and contrast them, those scenes are either happening in tandem or one of them has already been presented, thus drawing on the emotions the viewer has already experienced. In this case, it is neither, and also not how One Piece handles flashbacks in general. Every single major flashback in One Piece is told in its entirety all at once, never interspliced with current actions. Meanwhile, the live-action adaptation shuns this approach with Luffy and Zoro, and it doesn't work as well. The smaller changes to the backstory are also not immune to my criticisms, such as how Luffy eats his devil fruit and how Shanks rescues him, making the former a deliberate action rather than the incidental consequence of a voracious child, and the latter less impactful due to the boat being intact rather than capsized. And the bottle should have been shattered on Shanks' head, not on the bar table. It's more badass that way. The Captain Morgan episode is pretty solid on its own merits, but while some changes are good, such as Zoro being there to turn in a bounty, Helmeppo's nude swordsman fantasy, and Nami's earlier utilization in the narrative, it misses out on key characterization which sells Zoro and Captain Morgan. Captain Morgan originally is erecting a massive statue of himself, half the size of his ego, which is to explicitly demonstrate his authoritarian brutality over not just the townspeople, but his own subordinates who hate him too. The rice balls are no longer fed to Zoro after he has been strung up and starved for over a month in a girl's purposeful defiance of authority. Instead, it was an accident, followed by Zoro's defiance of authority. This eliminates the emotional impact of the events which happen and reduces the inhumanity of Helmeppo, even removing the attack dogs. Luffy is also the one who cuts all of Zoro's ropes, and it's without any action happening, and without the imminent execution of Zoro. This, in addition to the poor later placement of Zoro's backstory, leads into, instead of a scene of him swearing allegiance to Luffy after explaining his dream, something more akin to an alliance between them. In short, it does not sell the two of them becoming a pirate crew, and it would have been just as believable for them to go separate ways afterwards. The way they are forced to go together is from being legitimately chased off the island instead of farcically. It leads back into Morgan not being seen as a despot by his subordinates, which is central to the point of that arc. As I continue going through these arcs, the emerging theme theme is being selective about what is important to show and subsequently missing out on what is actually important. The setup to Orangetown works pretty well, but it misses out on what makes that arc memorable in the first place. It creates and draws on a personal connection between Luffy and the town's mayor, alongside, and more importantly, the dog Xiao Xiao. Having him witness firsthand the abandoned town due to Buggy's takeover, the relentlessness of Xiao Xiao in protecting his personal treasure of his master's store, and the mayor's defiance of Buggy in the face of cruelty, sells Luffy's involvement in taking down Buggy. One of the things One Piece is about is personal relationships, and how Luffy will risk his life for the sake of those he befriends. Orangetown perfectly exemplifies how this is lacking in the live-action adaptation. Another thing it struggles with is the aesthetic of Buggy. I maintain that Buggy is menacing in his introductory arc as a villain, but there is always an element of goofiness to his villainousness. He looks stupid, he acts stupid, his crew is stupid, and he names his trump card Cannonball after himself. Despite all that, he is clearly a force of death and destruction who has subjugated an entire town and stabs Zoro. In the live action, he feels more like the Dark Knight's Joker. I can appreciate the differences, like his obsession with the spotlight and more sane villainy, but the makeup and acting are clearly inspired by that portrayal of the Joker in a way that Buggy never did. I think what it comes back to is the removal of slapstick comedy. Without constant shouting and action-reaction humor, it naturally feeds into Buggy becoming something he isn't. It's fine, but suboptimal, and certainly not the worst on character. The next thing they mess up, aside from my biggest gripe with the adaptation, is Zoro's backstory. Not the backstory itself, but they do the same thing that was done with Luffy, intersplicing it with another scene that is, at best, tangentially related, in this case, climbing out of a well. As I said before, the placement of Zoro's backstory in the manga is a deliberate choice to show him reflecting on his dreams in the face of death. He may be stuck in a well in the live action, but it's not like his life is in imminent danger. Furthermore, it's inaccurate to compare the struggle of overcoming his childhood rival to the struggle of climbing out of a well. The actual themes of the former are unrelated. The implication of that scene is, "Man, the struggle of climbing out of this well is reminding me of all the times I struggled to defeat Kuina." But the point of that backstory is her memory serves as a driving force for him to strive to become the world's greatest swordsman. It's a misreading of the source material. The unfortunate thing about live-action Usopp and Syrup Village is not that it was done poorly or even that it misunderstands its source material, but that a structural rewriting of the arc inadvertently cuts out Usopp's character development and what leads to him being invited aboard the ship to begin with. There is an entire sequence in the manga where he has to work through his fear and prevent an entire pirate crew from ransacking the village by himself, and also Nami, until Luffy and Zoro can take them out. He is putting his dream into action and showing his value, gaining the trust of Luffy and Zoro. He also acts in direct defiance of pirates who are massively stronger than him in order to protect Kaya. He is putting his dream into action and showing his value, gaining the trust of Luffy and Zoro. But in the live-action adaptation, the only things they nail are his backstory and their relationship with Kaya. Although they do also go too far with them in that one, ending it with a kiss. But it's an inoffensive change. His introduction to Luffy is lamer, being a worker at the shipyard rather than someone LARPing as a major pirate captain, and the justification for him setting out to sail under the Straw Hat flag in particular falls flat. The plot of the Baratier was handled disgustingly. Don Krieg is replaced with Arlong for dumb reasons I'll get to, and the reason why Mihawk is there boggles the mind. Instead of Krieg showing up following a catastrophe at the hands of Mihawk, Krieg is just killed in that altercation, and Mihawk is ordered to go there by Garp to capture Luffy. This is completely out of character for Mihawk, who as a warlord doesn't need to take orders and actively avoids doing so. He even says as much after defeating Zoro, as though to overtly tell the audience the writing doesn't make sense, in this case being self-contradictory.
Hello, my name is Adboy. Being in Texas and dealing with the Texas heat and humidity, using liquid IV keeps me from falling out from heat stroke. Being outside and sweating to death is not something I enjoy. Hell, nobody does. And I personally prioritize hydration to make sure I and the people around me don't fall out from the heat. Liquid IV is a category-winning hydration brand fueling your well-being, and their hydration multiplier is the one product you're missing out in your daily life. In just one stick, you get 5 essential vitamins and 2 times faster hydration than water alone. Use it first thing in the morning, before a workout, when you feel run down, after a long night out, and long flight. What I like about Liquid IV is the fact that it isn't chalky. A lot of these mixes, like a lot of these drink mixes, are chalky and it drives me up a fucking wall. I personally tried watermelon and Concord grape, and they're pretty damn good, I gotta say. Easy to mix, great taste, it's easily portable with the little 2 packets that they come in. Put one in my little pocket, and so whenever I feel like I'm starting to get dehydrated, mix one up and I'm ready to rip. 1 stick of Liquid IV and 16 ounces of water hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone. 12 delicious, refreshing flavors to keep your hydration routine exciting. Contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. Made with premium ingredients, non-GMO, and free from gluten, dairy, and soy, so anybody can enjoy this. Liquid IV believes equitable access to clean and abundant water is the foundation of a healthier world. Liquid IV partners with leading organizations for innovative solutions to help communities protect both their water and their futures. Today, Liquid IV has donated over 39 million servings in 50 plus countries around the world. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code SHREDDIT at checkout. That's SHREDDIT. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code SHREDDIT at liquidiv.com. Ready to shop Better Hydration? Use my special link in the description below to save 20% off anything you order. Now, back to the podcast, or the show, or whatever you want to call it.
And I actually cannot over-exaggerate how smaller details, in this case changes, can add up over the course of the series to seriously change its characters, their personalities, and the way they come across. Directly compare live-action Luffy to his manga, or better yet, his anime counterpart. Anime Luffy is brazen, brash, loud, explosive, tactless, and an honest idiot. He's simple-minded, bursts out of a barrel, breaks things, and shouts frequently. He doesn't sneak around and is unconcerned with people knowing of his presence. Live-action Luffy, whether it be attributed to tone shifting or plot restructuring, demonstrates a lot more self-awareness and conventional intelligence. To illustrate what I'm saying, consider the part of the live action where Luffy and Zoro return to the mansion after having just been thrown out of it. It is locked down with metal shutters and the like. So to get back in, they prop open the shutter with a statue, then sneakily enter, gently closing the door behind them. Anime Luffy would have just broken the entire thing open with a punch, announcing his presence and intention. On Alvida's ship too, for a non-speculative comparison, in the source material, he jumps out of the barrel with a shout, whereas in the live action, he climbs out regularly and actively shushes Kobe to mask his presence. Why would Luffy care if he was found? Small differences like these, which are benign individually and aren't even bad writing choices in a vacuum, cascade into the creation of a fundamentally different character, specifically personality in the case of Luffy. And it's important to consider that these changes would not change much, if anything, of the fundamental plot or its pacing and timing, just the characters which interact with it. This alteration also accounts for those who have felt that Inaki's performance as Luffy was odd, stiff, or wooden. It's because of the writing excising a lot of the fundamental exuberance to Luffy's character, likely as a part of its intention to change the slapstick tone into a more serious one. Zoro also suffers on this front, coming across as a more grumpy and joyless than he should, smiling, laughing, and being expressive far less often than in the source material. There is a shit-eating grin often displayed in the source material which is just missing from the live action, such as when he takes the mortal wound from Mihawk. These are different characters. It doesn't really matter if the writing technically works or is good with these characters on its own merits. It isn't One Piece and doesn't understand why those characters are great, why they are charismatic, why they are so impactful. I am now brought to the first major structural issue of the series, the map of the Grand Line. As opposed to being a series of largely disconnected stories, as the East Blue Saga is supposed to be, the plot element of Buggy's map, which now was in the possession of the Marines, is used to connect them. Stealing it from the Marines leads to Buggy trying to steal it from them, which leads to Arlong chasing them down. That last part is where the problems lie. Arlong didn't know about the map, he wasn't one to take matters into his own hands, and most importantly, it causes Nami's betrayal to have less impact. In Baratier, Nami is supposed to make the independent decision to betray the fledgling Straw Hats and head to Arlong. This demonstrates how he has a hold on her despite letting her roam freely. At any point in time, she could have fled Arlong, but instead she chose to continue stealing for him to hopefully one day buy her village back. In the live action, it takes them being physically present for her to betray the Straw Hats. It makes the betrayal less convincing and her less of a conflicted character. It's obvious from the get-go that this is against her will, diminishing the impact. The elimination of Don Krieg also hurts Sanji. Sanji will feed anyone who is hungry, no matter who or what the circumstances, including, of course, Gin and Don Krieg, which is what makes having them be the source of the conflict important, as it is about demonstrating that Sanji will never regret feeding someone who is hungry, and how that insistence challenges Gin's actions and morality. Without the fights with those two, there is no importance placed on that quality of Sanji's character. There is neither negative nor positive consequences to that action. So while Sanji himself is unchanged and unaffected by the adaptation, with all of the elements of his character still existing, there is still missing that actual thematic relationship with the plot itself. All this to say, there are consequences to changing the plot structure of the series, ones which directly hurt the characters and the themes being presented, oftentimes making them less coherent. But the biggest problem, in my opinion, is Garp. They did him wrong in deeply frustrating ways by, generally speaking, making him way too involved in the East Blue. He is supposed to show up to arrest Morgan, recruit Kobe, fall asleep while eating donuts, and that's it. He's not supposed to proselytize about the morality of Marines, incessantly chase after Luffy, fight Luffy, order Mihawk, and so on. Garp is an interesting character because he is deeply conflicted between the love for his family and the duty of his job. He doesn't chase Luffy in the East Blue because he doesn't want to get involved. He only makes a show of trying to arrest Luffy in Water 7 after checking up on him, and he refuses to get involved in the Marineford War. He knows that if he were to go after Luffy, he would be forced to make that choice between family and duty, and would likely ultimately choose duty, so he refuses to put himself in that position, not wanting to lose his family, especially due to his own actions. The live action throws that concept out of the window, by not only having him chase Luffy down, then actually making that choice since he was put in that situation, and then choosing family over duty. It's a failure on every front. Furthermore, the excessive screen time has a negative consequence on the rest of the series, actively taking away from time that would have been better spent on things like I've mentioned up until this point, fleshing out Usopp and his role against the Kuro Pirates in Syrup Village, actually having Luffy fight Don Krieg, having Captain Morgan erect a giant statue of himself, etc. It's a missed opportunity to give that much time to things that don't matter instead of things that do. Also, it will detract from reveals that occur later on should they adapt that far. It's supposed to be a shock, a gigantic reveal that Luffy's grandfather is the most revered Marine, one who then reveals that Luffy's father is the most notorious criminal. For all the involvement Garp had, there was never a scene which demonstrated how Luffy takes after him, such as the overeating and sleeping while doing it, and it's a big disappointment to have Garp throw exactly one cannonball at them, and that one wasn't even the size of a ship. This heroic Giga Chad comes across as meek compared to Mihawk, since we actually get to see him cut a ship in half. It's so deeply frustrating to not just waste time, but to misuse it. Now for some speculation as to why it was restructured the way it was. I get the impression that the intention was that everything which occurred within these 8 episodes had to be related and build into each other for a climactic and satisfying conclusion, and it either wasn't desired, or more likely, wasn't allowed for it to be sequential, unrelated stories. Like, a second season was neither guaranteed nor expected, so it all needed to be self-contained. But that's not One Piece. One Piece is having a buff marine in a dog hat show up within the first 20 chapters, then never get mentioned again until he reappears 300 chapters later, and not needing to elaborate on who he is or why in the meantime, because it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to the story at hand. It has been announced that there will be more seasons to come, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that was the case from the outset, given the record of previous manga and anime adaptations. So it still could have been written with just the one season in mind. So while live-action One Piece is a functional, albeit middling, series due to amateurish filmmaking, its tonal differences, restructuring, and frequent misreadings of the source material make it a distinctly inferior version of the series. I have one more criticism as I segue into shoutouts and such: the musical score. At first I was going to say it was odd and tonally disconnected from the presentation, but I rewatched some scenes which initially gave me that impression, and I'm no longer so confident in that take. I think what led me to think that is because I was watching it live in a voice call with many people, and we were pretty consistently talking over the show, so it was harder to be immersed in what I was watching and actually hear the music. I did refer to the song playing when Arlong fights Luffy at the Baratier as pirate trap music though, and an individual's mileage will vary on how well it fits the scene. Here's a bit of the song to hear what I mean and judge my ear on. For more brilliant and absolutely hilarious takes like that, I stream events like these on twitch.tv/SHREDDIT when I have ideas for them. I announce these events in advance on Twitter as @sour_Lehman, that's lemon with 2 E's, as well as publish short reviews of other media I've consumed and other miscellaneous thoughts I have. Thank you for watching until the end. Given enough feedback and interest, I am willing to more meticulously and thoroughly go through this adaptation scene by scene, with the additional knowledge of a more recent reading and viewing of the source material, resulting in a much longer but more detailed and accurate analysis. And most important of all, pour one out for the striking Hollywood workers. I have every hope for their success in at least moderately reforming the filmmaking business. They can be donated to and supported at the Entertainment Community Fund, website being entertainmentcommunity.org.